Hey there everyone, I'm Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox and I am back from a little hiatus to bring you episode number 21 of the Weekly Ratchet. And today I'm sporting the red, white, and blue in celebration of the upcoming Independence Day here in the United States. And to celebrate that independence, today we're going to talk about board games of all shapes and sizes here on the Weekly Ratchet. Yes, hello everyone, and welcome to the Weekly Ratchet. Thank you so much for joining me here on the channel. I apologize up front for not putting out an episode last week. It wasn't by choice, and it wasn't because I was slacking off either. I was actually filming and editing my ass off, getting ready for the top 100 games list of mine, which is launching on the Dice Tower, and it actually starts on Monday, July 1st, over on the Dice Tower channel. I'll have an episode coming out every day for the next week, and in fact, 2 episodes the last 2 days running through my top 100 games. I have spent weeks on this getting all of the recording done, and just because of all the travel and everything I've been doing lately, I did not get to any editing until last week. I put in about maybe about 15 to 20 hours of editing just last week, and of course all the filming a couple of weeks prior. But it is done. It's all been uploaded. It's all in Chrissy's hands to get that out on the channel. And I'm looking forward for people's feedback, their comments. Feel free to come over here and toss in some comments as well if you're interested. I was going to try and do something of a Q&A, and I didn't even get around to asking Tom about it, so it's just going to be up there in the channel. I'm thinking about maybe doing a short video here in the next week or two about what it takes to do a top 100, what it takes to film something like this. It was an unbelievable amount of work, more so than I expected. I'm used to editing, all right? I do this a lot, but to put in 100 transitions, to put in 100 or more shots of B-roll, to bring in clips of other videos that I've done and time them all out and do the little talking head in the corner thing. Holy shit, it was a ton of work. Just way more than I expected. I'm really glad it's done. I'm looking forward to folks seeing it. Also, last week I mentioned that I was going to go out and look at some wind turbines. And so because this is something of a passion for me because of my career, I'm going to throw on some pretty music and show you some pictures. Enjoy. That was a very, very cool experience. I'm really glad I got to do it. I'm also really glad I didn't have any problems with motion sickness or anything like that. We were on about a 65-foot boat, which was still doing a decent amount of moving, especially heading into the lease area of our turbine, of our wind farm. There's a lot of waves, a lot of bouncing around. On the way back, it was a little bit smoother as we were kind of going with the wind. But I had a great time, and I'm looking forward to some other wind farm stuff coming up here in a few minutes. So I also mentioned last week, of course, I was in Georgia and I picked up a couple games. I didn't get to do really any gaming in the past week, but I have in the past 24 hours. So there's still plenty here to talk about, and I better quit screwing around. Let's get to some new games. All right, I don't have any particular order for this. I just kind of threw all these on the chair next to me. So let's get to it, all right? Lots of stuff. I'm actually gonna do a quick little unboxing here, just very quickly, invoice, bubble wrap. This is a series of expansions for High Frontier for All. This is a very, very heavy space exploration game. I think it is. It has something to do with, exploring the fringes of the solar system and all that kind of stuff. I have High Frontier for All over in my column of hardest games. I have opened it. I've looked at that board. Holy shit. But I kind of cracked the rule books. It's a hell of a game, and it was one of those where on this channel someone suggested me a long time ago, like, oh, you should definitely check out High Frontier. You love space games, yada yada, and they're right. And I got it, and I still really want to try it, and it's daunting, and I just have not had a chance. But these are expansions. These are on GameFound. This was some of a Kickstarter type thing. And in fact, I don't even think these are like 4 modules, and I think that Kickstarter was for a 5th module, but it was like an economy or a stock market-y type thing. And I don't really care for that kind of mechanism, but I used it to get these. So yeah, I don't know what to do with them. I have never played the game. But it's kind of one of those things, like, I know that you don't get a lot of chances to get this stuff. And so I went ahead and I picked it up through that crowdfunding campaign to save a little bit of money. What the hell have I done here? Anyways, moving on. So those are High Frontier for All expansions. Up next, I picked up the Transformers, the deck building game, Chaos Unleashed expansion. This is the 3rd expansion that requires a base game. There are 3 base games that you can play. I should not have bought this. Like, I have remorse, but kind of as like a all-in collector. I have everything else for the game. I might as well get this. The problem with these is that they are just incredibly difficult to put together. You can't just toss an expansion in with the rest of the game. You have to like add cards in and take other cards out. Now this one says you just add them in. This one does also give you a 1 against many, and it gives you a co-op mode against an AI bot, which is what's his name? Omicron, the planet-shaped, size transformer, which means it will allow for solo play, which is kind of one reason why I went ahead and I picked it up, because this game is not very good, but I really like it. I really like it as a 1 versus 1, kind of a team versus team, Autobots versus Decepticons. It does have a cooperative mode in the original game, which I think also allowed for solo, but it was just kind of just trying to rack up points. Here you're actually trying to take out Omicron. So I am looking forward to trying this if I ever get around to it. I've always loved Transformers. So Chaos Unleashed. Up next, all right, let me skip that one for a moment. I was down in Augusta, Georgia last week, which is near my in-laws' house, and I went to a game store there. I used to live there. In fact, my wife and I met there, and then I moved out shortly thereafter, and yada, yada. Anyways, but there's a game store in the area, and I stopped by and picked up Cascadia Landmarks. This is an expansion to Cascadia. I've heard good things about it. I like Cascadia. It's a little light for my taste, but I like what it does, and I was thinking maybe this would kind of amp up the games a little bit. For me, I think the game, where is it? Life of the Amazonia kind of replaced Cascadia for me, because it's heavier, it's got that bag building element, there's a lot more decision space to it, I think, than in Cascadia. But still, Cascadia is a good game. I've held on to it. I probably will hold on to it, and I wanted to try this out. So I picked that up. Also, while I was there, I picked up this game. I was actually surprised to see it on the shelf. This is Harmonies. This game is all the rave right now. I cannot believe how much social media activity I have seen about this game. And I am one of those people that when I see it, I'm like, not today. I'm not going to buy into the hype. Stay away from me. But they had it on the shelf, and I thought, all right, let me like do a quick, research online. I found a video, and it actually looked pretty good, so I picked it up. We've already played it twice. I'll talk about it here in a little bit. I actually kind of enjoyed it. I like it. I'll talk about it more here in a few minutes. Continuing to move on, this one, hey Kay, how you doing, Kay? I got it, Kay. This is Star Trek Panic. I've talked about this on the Ratchet previously. I think just talking about like the Star Trek IP. I did not realize that this game is really out of print, and not only is it out of print, but the publisher, USAopoly, now known as the Op, no longer has the Star Trek license. So it will not be reprinted, most likely ever, unless another company can pick it up. So I went ahead and I grabbed it. I got this from, I'm blanking on the name of the company, Noble Knight. I got it from Noble Knight Games, and I was a little disappointed at kind of how roughed up the box is here. It's pretty beat up. But this was, I think back in the day, this was kind of like a Target game type of thing. So anyways, I am glad I got it. I haven't had a chance to play it yet. But it's kind of neat. It's Castle Panic, so it's one of those tower defense kind of games, except for that in this one you are defending the Enterprise, and it's the original NCC 1701, the Captain Kirk days. And there's an element here where you can actually move the castle. So you can kind of fly through space, and you have to move those items that are coming at you, other ships, enemies, whatever, and they'll kind of rotate around the ship so you can bring your firing weapons to bear on them, or you can try and turn your weakest shields away from, you know, the invading enemies, all kinds of stuff. Looks neat. Like I said, haven't played it yet. I know my buddy Daniel's interested in this one, and I think I can get my wife to play it too. So, Star Trek Panic. Just a couple more left. I promise I'm getting through them. This one's kind of special. Actually, these next two are kind of special. This one's also really big. Hang on a second. Okay, this is Pampero. As you can probably tell from this cover, this is a game about wind farms. It's about building a renewable energy grid in Uruguay. The designer Julian Pombo is from Uruguay. The reason that this game is actually kind of special to me is not because of its theme, although I certainly appreciate the theme. It's because this is the first Kickstarter, first game that was on a Kickstarter that I did a preview video for right here on the channel. You can find it. It's about 2 years old. And this was my payment, was getting a copy of the game. And I've kind of been sitting here for 2 years wondering, am I ever actually going to get paid for that video? And I actually first got like some deluxe coins that I had purchased myself from the Kickstarter. Like I spent like 30 bucks on the campaign, and that was all I got. And I thought, oh, that, you know, those jerks. But I was wrong. 2 or so days later, the full game showed up with one of the 2 expansions. I've pre-ordered the second expansion. I'm going to try and review this on the Dice Tower to cover those couple of little costs. I think the game's got a couple little flaws with it, if I'm honest. The reviews have been both stellar and weak. And I think the stellar reviews are from folks who aren't really looking into the theme of the actions and how some of the mechanisms of this game kind of break the theme, I think, or at least that immersion of the theme. However, I'm hoping to get this played. Daniel and I played it a long time ago. It was actually one of the first games that him and I ever played here. And he said, yeah, I'll play it again, but it's not really high on my list because we just didn't have a great play of it. It's got some flaws, but I'm curious to see how it works now. This is Pampero, which I think means wind in whatever language they speak in Uruguay. I apologize for my ignorance. Anyways, here's the last new game. This is hot out of the mailbox. This came in yesterday. I was out of town last night. This is Final 9. This is from Monkey Mind Games. Designer's name is Matt. And I've been talking to Matt for a long time because I bought the original Final 9. This is kind of like an expansion, and I think he might have the base game in here as well. No, this just says expansion only. The original game of this was about a third or so of the size. It was just a box of cards with a couple of really tiny wooden discs, and they represented your frisbees in a disc golf game. And I bought the original game. Actually, it was a Kickstarter, so I kickstarted the original game. Really, really liked it. Did a review of it out on the Dice Tower for Board Game Breakfast. This was years ago, before I was actually doing reviews on the channel. And the guy saw it. He reached out to me. He's like, hey, I got some new games coming. Would you like to take a look at those? And that started our relationship. So this is now a preview copy for the new expansion. I think it already looks pretty fantastic. I cannot wait to break into this. And I just can't wait to play some more Final 9. This was a pretty good game. And I've got another golf game coming up here in a few minutes. I'm talking too long. Let's get on to question of the week. All right, I got to keep things rolling here with question of the week. Last week, actually 2 weeks ago, I asked you, how do you handle traveling with board games? Do you try to bring games? Do you not bother bringing games? Do you do small games, big games? What do you do? And I got a wide variety of answers. Let's go ahead and get to them now. Up first, Simulation Chris said he travels mostly by car, and so he will grab whatever is currently popular with the family and maybe one new game to learn and play during their trip. Yep. I agree with that quite a bit. Wayne Kruger said he packs games like Love Letter or Best Little Treehouse, which I had to look up, but doesn't usually play games while traveling. He said he also has a travel-sized version of Can't Stop that often gets played. Now, I tried looking up Best Little Treehouse, and all I could find was Best Treehouse Ever. I'm wondering if that was the same game. I looked at this a little bit out on Board Game Geek, and I got to check it out because, as I call this room the Treehouse, I'm looking always for some good Treehouse-themed games. So let me know if that was the right one. Best Treehouse Ever. The Meeple Society said they will often pack a single bag or a crate of games and focus on small footprint games that would work on a hotel table. Also said that they'll often look for game cafes in towns that they are traveling to, and that is certainly a good way to play games without having to pack them. A pretty good idea. Also, Katie and Greg of the Meeple Society both play a shitload of games together. And so, you know, for some of us who are talking about, oh, I bring games but I never get to play them. No, no, no. They bring games and they play those games, and then they buy games and they play those games too, and they go to cafes and say, you know what? Just, you guys suck. C.R. Pohl suggested that he might just take a gaming break while traveling, or that he might bring some small games like button shy games, or just play the online version of a game. And that's a very good point, C.R. Pohl. Traveling is definitely a great time to bring out some apps. And there are a lot of great app board games out there, great app-based implementation of board games like Everdell, Maglev Metro, Wingspan, Ticket to Ride, and I actually just updated my download of Race for the Galaxy. Now that I've kind of gotten into that New Frontier game, I wanted to try and figure out the card-based game of Race for the Galaxy using the app, and the app is nice because it shows you each card, and it also tells you what each card does, so you don't have to memorize all the symbology. So, good point there. Kay said that she loves traveling by train and will pack games that play well on a moving train, listing a few options. She says when it comes to playing games on a plane, she wouldn't even try. Yeah, unfortunately, plane seating and those stupid little tables have gotten so bad that I wouldn't try playing games on a plane really either. Again, a great time for apps. Thomas Greaves said that he likes to pack small games that he hasn't tried yet, and that Village Rails is his current go-to travel game. I also like using my travel time to try and learn some new games. In fact, I brought the rulebook for Pampero with me on a little trip that we took yesterday to visit my sister. Jamie Wiley said that traveling with games has never really worked out, so he just turns to apps, again, like we've talked about here already. And Yukon Zach said that he goes for small games with a big punch and gave a few examples, one of which was Lunar Base. And I had to look up Lunar Base. I recognized it. It was a Kickstarter that I didn't back, and now I'm wondering if that was a bad idea. So Zach, tell me a little bit more about Lunar Base. I remember the art of the cards, and I believe it's a deck building game. I don't remember why I didn't back it. I think that was one of those times when I was like, oh, I don't get to play games anymore. I'm just not going to buy any more games. You see how well that's worked out for me. Anyways, curious about that one. Lastly, Mark B didn't really get into question of the week. He mentioned last week's Ask Me Anything and mentioned an older question that I didn't answer about whether I prefer large boxes with some open space in them for expansions or small boxes that are kind of packed to the brim. And I'm going to say real quick, Mark, that I like the latter. I like to have a game that's pretty tightly packed. I'd rather get an expansion box later that is also packed, and I just kind of keep everything, as opposed to having a bunch of big boxes with open room in them, because a lot of games don't get expansions, or maybe I don't get them, or maybe they're just a few packs of cards. If you look at the expansion to Beyond the Sun, it hardly takes up any space whatsoever. So even when you add it to that box, you still have some room left in it, and I would rather not have all that open space taking up room on my shelves. So anyways, thanks for reminding me about that question. For me personally, I tend to go with the method described by Simulation Chris. I like to bring a blend of current family favorites, games like Robot Quest Arena, maybe the Let's Go to Japan that my daughter's really crazy about right now. And then I will also try to bring a couple of games that I haven't played yet, especially if they are games that have a solo mode. A lot of times if we're going out to a cabin like our cabin, or if we're doing like an Airbnb, something like that, I'm usually the one staying up quite late. My wife will go to bed pretty early. Obviously, daughter goes to bed at a reasonable time, and I like to stay up late and just enjoy the peace and quiet of a cabin in the woods, and that's when I'll try out some solo games. So that's definitely what I like to go with also, and I think I mentioned this, I'm heading to Dice Tower East next week, and so I've got a couple of the decks of cards from Wormwood, and I'm going to be bringing a couple of these because I can stuff them into some, pockets and cubbies of my luggage, and I can bring 4 or 5 different decks. I can play games in different configurations with different people, and this is pretty much all I need is a couple of these, and then of course the 2-sided civilian tokens. So I'm actually looking forward to doing that. All right, thanks so much for your responses. As always, I appreciate it. For next week, now, first of all, I am going to Dice Tower East all next week, but I will be back on Monday, so there won't be a Weekly Ratchet on Monday next week, but I'm hoping to do that filming maybe Tuesday. It might just be a little later into next week that I'll get the next Weekly Ratchet done. Anyways, I'm heading to Dice Tower East. That's a convention put on by the Dice Tower. What do you think about conventions? Have you ever been to a convention? Is there a convention you'd love to get to? Do you avoid conventions? If you go to conventions, what do you like to do at them? Do you, like to play games? Do you like to go shopping, try and get the new hotness? What is your take, if you will, on conventions? I'm curious to know, especially for some of you folks overseas. And in fact, if anyone goes to the big show over in Europe, or Germany, I can't remember what it's called right now, but I'd like for you to look for something for me. Well, let me know. Anyways, that is the question for next week, all about conventions. Let's move on to recently played games. All right, moving into recently played games. I didn't really think I was going to have many games to talk about, actually, for a while, because 2 weeks ago I was down in Georgia with family. This past week, Daniel was out of town. He was actually using our cabin as he was having some work done to his house. And then, of course, this week I'm going to Dice Tower East. Now, I'll have a ton of games to talk about after Dice Tower East, but I will probably do a special episode for a Dice Tower recap. I don't know if that'll be a Ratchet episode or not. Anyways, I did, however, get a couple of games in. In fact, even when we traveled, I'll kind of show you what I do when I go traveling. However, just before we left on our trip, actually before I went to go look at turbines, we took another crack at Lands of the Mesozoic. I mentioned this 2 weeks ago from Pungo Games. We played it very, very wrong, and this time we got a lot of the mechanisms down pat a little better. This is still a very, very difficult game. There is this sort of evolutionary aspect to it, this food chain aspect to it. We have to have so many land cards to feed herbivores, so many herbivores to feed carnivores, and if at any point that ecosystem gets out of whack, it causes extinction events. And you have to literally start killing off dinosaurs to balance the system back out again. And then throughout the game, extinction events will also happen that will cause dinosaurs to die off, and you also have to lose some of your land cards, which will cause a chain reaction between the herbivores and carnivores, forcing you to lose more of them. Now, that means that getting out dinosaurs is really tough. It takes a lot of setup, and especially because your cards go out exhausted, you can't use them until a future round, and you only get so many rounds in the game, and so you've really got to plan ahead to get dinosaurs out, and it's just not always that easy. It did start to click with me a little better, and I will say that I enjoyed this play of this, the most recent play of this. I still just don't know how often this game is going to come out, because it's a little weird. It's a little clunky. I really wish it did a better example of telling you what's coming up next, of kind of reminding you what the actions are, of how they work and what happens in certain parts of the game. There's not enough reminders on the cards, on the board, and that kind of stuff to remind you what you're supposed to do. And so it's easy to forget things, and that can be a little frustrating. But I do think there's a decent game here. I definitely think it is a challenging puzzle. This game is a lot more difficult than this very basic, kids' textbook cover might make you think. Lands of the Mesozoic. Let me see. Up next, we played the new Harmonies. Harmonies is a tile placement game. Think about Azul. If you ever played Azul, you're drafting these little wooden tokens from a central display and then putting them onto your own player board. However, unlike Azul, they immediately get replaced. So every time it's your turn, you have 5 options to choose from, which is nice. And then you're also drafting these cards that are coming from a display. And when you draft the cards, you put these little cubes on them, and they represent different animals. The cards have spectacular art, by the way. And then you're trying to arrange these wooden tokens on your board to match these depiction of these tokens on the bottom of each of the animal cards. And when you have made that arrangement in any way, you can organize it in any way that you want. When you've made that arrangement of tokens, you then get to put one of these animals on one of those tokens, and the animal card will tell you where it has to go. So you can then try and create multiple patterns of that, trying to group them as tightly as you can to reuse certain types of tokens in that environment to put out as many of these animals as you can. And if you manage to get all of the animals of that card onto your map, you then flip that card over and it opens up a space at the top of your player board to put more cards. And so it's all about getting these tokens out, getting these animals onto your map, and scoring as many points as you can. You score points for each cube that's coming out onto that board. As the cubes come off of those cards, the card itself becomes worth more points to you, eventually scoring its full value when you have removed all of the cubes from it. But then you also score points for the arrangement of those tokens on your board. Tall trees, tall mountains will all give you extra points. There are buildings that score points for having different colored tokens around them. Fields score for pairs, and then your river, depending on the side of the board that you're using. There's actually an A and a B side of your player board. Everyone has to use the same side, but the blue water tiles score differently depending on whether you're building islands in an ocean or building a river through a landscape. So all that said, I've quite enjoyed this. It's very, very thinky. I think its complexity is surprising just based on its appearance. There's a little bit more of a puzzle here than you might expect. And there is that element, though, in that, okay, I really need like 2 wood tokens, and you just never get 2 wood tokens coming out into a single pile, and so it's going to take you 2 turns, and maybe someone else takes the wood token that you need. So there's that kind of aspect. But what I did like in my most recent play this, which I did not win, was that you can try and, okay, I'm going to try and get this animal played. But if nothing is out there that's going to help you score that animal, you then start looking at, okay, well, what else can I do with the tokens that are out here? Maybe I can work on building a bigger mountain or get an extra tree in my forest, some other things that will help get me some endgame scoring just by the arrangement of those tokens, and not worry too much about the animals that you're scoring. Now, I say that in this last game, my wife scored a ton of animals and just clobbered us. She didn't get as many tokens, didn't get as many points from tokens on the board, but from everything that I was seeing, a lot of us were getting more points from our animal cards than we were from the tokens on the board. So I don't know that is a perfect solution to just work on your player board. You do still need to get some animals scored as well. Anyways, a neat game. I can see why this one's pretty popular. I think it's very approachable. It maybe isn't a, inexperienced player type game. I think some new players like my parents would definitely struggle with this. But, for, let's say, lighter gamers, I think they would really find something enjoyable in Harmonies. Okay, moving on. So we traveled last week down to Georgia, two weeks ago down to Georgia, and I had mentioned a couple times these Paco games. I intentionally brought a whole bunch of these. In fact, here is my, glad I put this here. This is my little travel tote for my Paco games. And as you can see, I can fit a whole mess of these things in here, as well as the microbrew game I mentioned on my AMA. And I've got 13, 3, 6, 9, 10. I've got 10 games in this little thing. Now, on the 3 that I played, we played Dig, Yet, and Far. They're all 3-letter titles. It's a Chris Handy thing. I don't know why. But we played first was Far, and this one looks like a kind of a King Domino ripoff, but it actually isn't. What you're doing in this game is you're playing out these tiles and you're trying to build large areas of different biomes. And it was like forest, fields, maybe grass or tundra, and then ocean. And there may be a 5th one, I don't recall. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to build the largest environment. So it has to spread across multiple cards. It doesn't matter how large or small the environment is, as long as just how many cards it spreads across. But then you have to keep one edge of that environment facing you. You have to be able to have a straight line of sight to one edge of that environment to be able to score it, and it cannot be any more than 5 cards. If it expands onto a 6th card, you don't score it at all. You also have a king and queen card that each player starts with, and you can put those out as well attached to an environment, and that environment will score whether or not you can see and edge of it. And so the best thing to do, because your king and queen only come on one of those 2 environments, I think one is on the field, and I think the other one might be on the grass, if I recall. Yeah, actually I think that's it. So you want to try and get the king, for example. The king is on the field, I think. You want to get the king in a field of 5 that you can't see and have another field of 5 that you can see. That's going to give you 10 points on fields alone. And same for the grass with the queen, as far as it looks like here in the back of this box. We got a little aspect of that wrong at first because I thought it had to be closest to you. It doesn't have to be closest to you. You just have to have a line of sight to, again, one edge of that environment, and then any of the cards that it connects to will be counted. And so we really enjoyed the puzzle of this. And now that I understood the scoring of it just a little better, I'm looking forward to even playing this a bit more. This would go great at you can play this on a bar top, no problem. And I really enjoyed it. So that's Far by Chris Handy, a pack of games. We then immediately set up and played Dig. Dig is one of the older games from his. I think this is the 12th game in the lineup. Far is the 22nd game in the lineup. And this is just about moving dogs across the field, digging up bones and trying to get them back to a dog bowl. However, each bone is worth a number of points, and that number of points fluctuates. And so as the bones start to finally stack up, when you remove a card to get the bones, you take the Far card in this long strip and you move it in to fill that gap. And as you finally fill in the gaps closest to the doghouse, the far left end of the field, with these dog bowls, the one that's closest to the doghouse will score the most points, 5, and then 4, 3, 2, 1. And that sets the value of the bones that you've collected when you drop them back off in the bowl of the proper color. Very, very simple. That's almost how to play the entire game. And it was kind of funny because I thought I was doing pretty well, but my wife got a bunch of 4-point bones right towards the end of the game. I had a couple of 5s, but we basically tied until we got down to the last bone, and I wasn't able to collect it. If I had collected and turned in the last bone, we would have had an absolute perfect tie. We had the exact same number of every bone in the game except for 1, and so she won that game. A good, fun game. I like Dig. The only problem with Dig is it takes up a lot of space. It takes up a very short but very wide space. I mean, it's something like this long on the table. Anyways, the last one we played was Yet. This is another new one. This is 18 in the series. This one was really weird. Players control airships, and you're moving around these cards that are arranged in a clock face pattern, so 12 spaces, and you actually have an hour and a minute hand, although one never moves. So I don't know why it's in the box. But the hour hand moves starting at midnight, going all the way back around to midnight. And at the end of each round, after every player has played 2 of 3 cards that they draft, and those cards will let them move, let them change the direction and move the other direction so they can go clockwise or counterclockwise, but they have to be setting in the right direction. They can flip over cards. They can even advance the clock 1 hour in the middle of this display. And then whoever is sitting on a card with a number on it equal to or less than the current hour of the game gets to score that card, and the score of that card is simply worth its value. So the 12 is the most valuable card in the game. This one was really, really weird. It is not only extremely abstract, but it's just strange. Like, I don't know why it's airships. I don't know what the sky aspect of this game has anything to do with it. It could just be little pawns, you know, moving around a clock. I don't know, whatever. And it was really, really weird because you just don't know what your opponent has. And so you can set yourself up for a great move, and then they move the hour hand, and now you're kind of just completely hosed, or at least you're not going to get as many points as you thought you would. It's also a little frustrating when you watch a player score the 10, and you were trying to get to the 11, and you didn't make it for whatever reason. And so you score nothing, they score 10 points, and you're like, how am I ever going to recuperate, you know, and recover my score in this game? So didn't really care for that one much at all. But those were the Chris Handy pack of games. Only 3 more left. So up next is Wild Tiled West. Picture shown here because I played this game yesterday with my sister. It is a game, a polyomino game about kind of building up a Western town or series of towns and trying to score points with a wide variety of methods. I actually did a review of this out on the Dice Tower a few months ago after the retreat last year. I enjoyed the game the first couple of times I played it, but it has just kind of trailed off in my mind a little bit because I've started to just see all the same stuff over and over and over again. We played this with my sister. She really, really enjoyed it. It's very expensive out on Amazon right now, and so I sold her my copy for very cheap, and now I don't have it anymore. So I still think it's a good game. I do think that as far as a polyomino game goes, it is the most thematic polyomino game that I can think of. You do kind of feel like I'm trying to get these towns built out. I'm trying to get rid of the bandits. I need to get sheriffs. I need to get bullets. I need to do all this stuff. And you're also trying to score points on the way. And I really do like how it works. I just don't care for the randomness of how you're collecting these polyomino tiles because it's just a dice roll. You can't just draft whatever you want. There's not as much flexibility as with a game like, say, Planet Unknown, and that luck aspect just kind of turns me off a little bit of it. So I've enjoyed my plays of it, and I'm glad it's going to go off to someone who will have some fun with it. We played Harmonies again over the weekend. My sister loved that one. I'm going to be looking for a copy for her, as she now wants a copy of that game. And then we got to play, and I mentioned this one maybe an episode or two ago, Trial by Trolley. This is a very, very stupid, very, very inappropriate game about basically you're forming teams. You have one player is the conductor, and then you're laying out two innocent victims and one evil victim on these train tracks, and then you're putting out modifiers to try and change the backstory of any of these characters and trying to convince the conductor which track to run down and mow over everybody on that track. And then whoever at the end of the game has the least death tokens wins the game. We had a blast playing this. Again, very inappropriate. My wife ran over Jesus, which was it was funny. And it's one of those games too where it's all about your audience. So my sister and I tend to have very dark senses of humor. I played a card at one point that was your dad, and my sister ran him over. And then later on I had a card called Steve, which happens to be our dad's name. And so I played Steve out. If it was anyone else, it'd have been like, well, how is that an innocent victim? I couldn't care less. But it was our dad, and so that worked, and actually Jen saved him that time. So, you know, I got this on clearance from the Barnes & Noble store when it was going out of business. I think I paid about $15 for it, and I got my money's worth in just sheer laughter. Don't know if it'll ever get played again, but I did have fun with Trial by Trolley. And the last game to mention, no, not the last game. This was Sleepy Cats. This is a game that the dice I picked up at Gen Con. Actually, this is not from the Dice Tower. I got this for free at Gen Con last year when I bought a game, and they were just handing these out. And this was a really, really lackluster game about trying to match up cards with cats around each side, and it's a racing game. So you basically have two or maybe just one card in your hand, and you're trying to place them out to match other cards, but you cannot place one of your cards next to one of your previous cards. You have to place it next to cards that don't match it. And you then have to also match the cats on the edge of the cards. The rules are really, really bad. It's just a little single rule sheet, and it's so small that even the art showing you the examples of how a proper turn works was so small that I couldn't make out the cats. I couldn't tell what I was actually supposed to be matching. I had to use the magnifying camera on my phone just to see the examples. And then it's a racing game, so the first person to be out of cards wins the game, and I think I beat my wife by like 5 seconds or whatever. It was cute, but it also took up way too much space as you're trying to lay out all these cards. Even for a 2-player game, you need like 25-something cards out by the time you're done, and it would take up way too much space even at like a little bar top. So, Sleepy Cats. The last game we played this morning, just before I came home from my sister's house, was 18 Holes. Her boyfriend is an avid golfer, and so she actually has a couple of golf games. She bought him this game a while back, and they hadn't even punched it yet. So I volunteered to punch it, learn it, and teach it. We played it this morning, and it was actually pretty good. You get these club cards. You're drafting them at the beginning of the game, and then on your turn, actually, sorry, at the beginning of each round. So everyone kind of plays, and then you pick your next club, and you play your club, and the club will show you anywhere from 1 to 2 different decks of cards. You have a chipping deck and a 1 chipping deck and a 2, 3, 4, 5 deck. And so the card may say draw a chipping card or a 2 card, or it may say draw a 3 or a 4, or draw 2 4s, or just draw 1 card, but maybe it gives you a special exception, like the rough will not shorten your distance, for example. You draw cards then from the actual shot deck, and that shows you what's going to happen to your ball. And then you can pick the direction that you're departing from. It's a hexagonal grid based game, and then you're using that card to determine based on that direction where the ball lies. You're not actually keeping score in this game. You're not keeping track of your shots. Basically, when a player lands on the green, we assume the ball goes in, and anyone else who finishes that hole on that round will score a point. And at the end of the game, basically whoever has the highest score wins the game. So it really turns golf on its head. But we did really enjoy the mechanisms of it. There's this kind of, it's not a push your luck, but it's kind of like, well, I'm going to play this card and I'm going to draw a card, but man, I really hope that it's going to hook me this way, or I'm going to hit the tree. And then you're kind of scrambling to try and make up for what that card gives you. There is also an element with the chipping deck that you have to pick your direction first, because the chip shots are very short range shots. They also get to ignore trees. And so you have to pick your direction first and then hope that the card that you draw is going to put you in put you on the side of that direction that you want to be in. So we had a lot of fun with this. I did win this game. I'm not going to pick it up because I just can't see myself playing it. But as far as a golf game goes, I think it did a really good job. Her boyfriend Ryan really enjoyed it. He thought that it captured some of the the strategy and sort of the luck and randomness that can happen in golf. So they had a good time with it. I had a good time with it. And that was 18 holes. And that was an episode of the Weekly Ratchet. I know this was kind of a long one, had a lot to get through. Like I said, next week, not exactly sure when the episode will come out. If you're at Dice Tower East, be sure to stop by and say, hey, I have a long schedule of stuff I have to do that week, but I will be around. I will be playing games, and I'm looking forward to meeting some folks. So until I see you folks again, take care and cheers.